This will be an unboxing and an overview of the Sony Xperia X Compact Android smartphone. Now this particular phone was released in late 2016 and at the time of filming it is the most recent compact Xperia device, previous being the Sony Z5 Compact or Z5 Compact, which it basically follows up from. Even though it is supposed to be a compact version of the Xperia X, its visual design is actually most similar to the Xperia XZ. As you can see, there's these looped corners, and as well as the extra cutouts are on the back of the phone, and sort of square but rounded design. But much like the regular Xperia X, it does share a lot of the same hardware specifications. So, for example, it has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 650 CPU. It's got 3 GB of RAM. It's got 32 GB of storage, expandable micro SD in the SIM tray, up to 256 GB. It has a 4.6-inch 720p IPS display that's covered in Corning Gorilla Glass 4. That gives you a pixel density of 319 pixels per inch. A 720p display might not sound like much, but because of the size of the device, it's actually the same sort of pixel density that you find on an iPhone 6 or 7. So it's still very much Retina class. So that's not really going to be an issue. If you're thinking, oh, phone needs to be 1080p or 1440p, it's not really a problem here. On the back, as I sort of pointed out before, we've got the 23 megapixel camera, the same camera sensor that's used on the Xperia Z5 series, and the same that's on the regular X, and also the XZ. In addition, there's some additional sensors. There's a white balance sensor, there's a laser autofocus, and then of course there's the LED flash. On the front of the device we have one of the main staples of Xperia devices, which are the two front-facing speakers at the top and the bottom here. There's also the 5 megapixel front-facing camera. Then there's the proximity sensors here, and then the notification LED is to the right. The microphone is also hidden in the bottom speaker. So if we move over to the accessories part of the phone, just put this off to the side here. So in here we have user manuals and documentation, etc. We also have a set of headphones, because the Xperia X does have a headphone jack, which is what a connector, headphone jack. It must have taken a lot of courage to include that. So these are just the regular cheap MH, what are they? The MH410Cs. Some different units might come with MH750s, which have silicone adapters that actually go in the ear, so they're different sort of earphones. And then in here we also have a regular European style charger. So this is a 5-volt 1.5 amp charger. The Sony Xperia X Compact does support Qualcomm Quick Charge 3.0. So you can get about 60% or so in about half an hour or so, which is pretty good. But in addition to that, the cable that's included is a USB Type-C cable. So the Sony Xperia X Compact has a USB Type-C port, which is a reversible connection, which is very good because it's reversible. It supports faster charging rates and theoretically can support faster data rates. But it is important to make sure that you only use the included charger and cable that comes with this phone, because not all USB-C cables and chargers are made equally. For example, these are Anker Type-C to micro B adapters. So this adapter would allow you to charge the Xperia X using an older micro B connection from, say, an Samsung Galaxy S6 or an S7 or something like that. The S8 has Type-C. This particular one is an Anker brand. You can usually get unbranded or generic versions of these on eBay and other sites like Amazon for as little as $1, but I would really like to warn you to not use them and to do not buy them, because not all are compliant. If you use USB-C charging cables and devices that are not compliant with the appropriate power delivery and certification standards, you risk damaging either the charging port on your phone or your charger, or both. Not to mention it's also a fire hazard. So do not use cheap USB Type-C legacy adapters, because it's a really major risk. These Anker ones have been tested by a Google hardware engineer by the name of Benson Lung. He's reviewed a bunch of different USB-C cables and accessories, and I'll have a link to his Amazon reviews and all of the validated accessories in the video description, so you don't have to worry about it. But if that's too much for you, just use the included charger and the included cable, and stay away from cheap accessories for the Xperia X Compact, because that's just a nightmare waiting to happen. Another good thing about the Xperia X and X Compact, it has a technology called QNovo charging. So in addition of the USB Type-C and the quick charge and everything, QNovo charging means that the phone can better monitor the health of the battery. So Sony claim to be able to double the life expectancy of a smartphone battery to keep it in good condition. So typically a battery in a smartphone might be good for 2 years, but Sony say up to about 4 years you can get extended life, because it can actually keep how it charges. It can analyze how it charges the phone and charge it in better ways. In addition to that, it has a technology application feature that's installed on the phone called battery care. So if you plug your phone into charge at say 11 p.m. and you unplug it at 7 a.m., typically with charging, it would start to charge from 11 and it would go up to 100% however many hours later, and it would stay there. With battery care, it will charge it up to 90%, and then just before you are about to unplug it, when you regularly unplug it, it will then give it that extra boost to 100%. So it's not keeping the battery at fully charged 100%, which does actually wear out the life of the battery. So that's a good feature to have. We just explore the side of the device before we power it on. So here is the power button and fingerprint reader combination. It is worth noting that the fingerprint reader does not work in US markets, supposedly due to patents and licensing that Sony can't acquire. But US customers, I have heard, have been able to flash or update the phone with software from other markets. So for example, a US customer could flash firmware from the UK and would be able to access fingerprint reader functionality. So if you are in the US and fingerprint reader functionality is important to you, just take note of that limitation. Here on the side here, we also have the volume rocker, up and down, which doubles as a zoom for the camera, and a camera shutter button, which has a two-step function. So if we power on the device, it will start the loading animation. So this particular phone, like I said, was launched in late 2016. This particular one was manufactured this year in 2017. So even though the phone was launched with Android 6.0, this actually has 7.0 on it, so we'll be able to explore Nougat on this device. So if we just go through the setup here. So a good thing about Sony, typically they offer quite reliable updates. So they're not delayed security updates or patches, or they're you're more likely to get security updates quickly instead of some other companies, OnePlus for example, or other vendors, which is good to see. Another useful thing about pretty much all Sony phones is that they have what's called unlockable bootloaders, which basically means you can install your own custom Android operating system on the phone. So even though Sony do offer pretty good software support, and in fact they do contribute to the open source development of Android, when the support for this device or an Xperia device eventually ends, it has an unlockable bootloader, so you can put your own Android version or an Android version made by a third-party developer. So you can still have the latest software features that Google bring out, but you won't need to buy a new phone in order to do it. Or if you like to customize your Android experience, you like to customize the icons and the interface a little bit more and have root functions, then you are able to do that in this device, even though it will obviously void your warranty. So this device has wireless 802.11 AC Wi-Fi, dual band. It does have Miracast support, so you could, if you want to mirror your screen to a HDMI dongle or TV, for example. It has Bluetooth 4.2. It's got built-in FM radio tuner, which is actually something that is missing from the newer Xperia devices, presumably because US carriers aren't particularly pleased about it. It has NFC. The NFC reader is on the back, where the Xperia is. On the regular X, it's on the front. I think the front is probably a better position for it because it's easier to access. If there's a pay terminal here, you just turn the phone over, whereas if it's, if you're holding the phone like this, it's harder to get the NFC reader to touch, but of course you're putting it down on a table, it's better. So it depends what you prefer, really. For GPS support, it has a multitude. It has everything but the European ESA European Space Agency GPS. So it has American GPS or Navstar GPS, which is what you're probably familiar with. It's been around for a while. It has a sister GPS, which is that same basic system, but it uses your mobile data to be able to get a quick lock on, so you don't have to stand somewhere for several minutes to try and get a GPS fix if you didn't have that assistance data. It has GLONASS GPS positioning, which is the Russian operated in standard version for global positioning. And it also has Baidu GPS, which is a bit different to both of those. Those satellites are a little bit more lower Earth orbit. So those the coverage for that those GPS satellites only works in China, and in some parts of Asia is the only place you get coverage for that. So a nice thing about Sony is that they, because they do contribute so much to the development, their Android is pretty vanilla. So if you were to get an Android, I probably should turn the brightness up maybe just a little bit. So if you were to get an Android, a stock Android version, or even a Pixel or a Google device, the interface is pretty similar to what you would find. So, but they've added some sort of quality of life changes and improvements. So there's nice little coloured icons in the settings menu, for example. But other than that, it's pretty stock Android. So a feature of Nougat, for example, is we've got the quick toggles here. So instead of needing to bring down all of your notification shades to change things like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, you just slide down and then you've got access to those quick settings there. Additionally, Nougat, you have the ability to reply to a notification. So if you have a message, you can just pull down the notification, you can hit reply, instead of needing to open up the app, which is a good improvement. Additionally, Nougat has a function called native functions for display scaling. So I can go here into the settings, I can go display size, and I can make all the UI elements a bit smaller, so you can actually fit more onto the screen now, which is a nice feature to have natively. Some Android custom software ROMs, like I said with the custom Android support that this phone has, do have that feature and have had that feature for a while, but it's always been a bit clunky, so it's nice to have proper native support for that in regular Android. Another very useful feature is also multi-window, which I think is probably the most important thing. So say if I were to open up Chrome, I can hold down this button, which is the app switch button, and I could select settings. So I could have, you could have a browser open, and you could have a document, a Google Doc or something like that, or even a message in the second window, and you could be working on both at the same time, which I think is a really useful feature to have, which is pretty good to have on a device with this sort of smaller screen. You'll be able to fit more on it. Another thing about the button on the side here for the camera shut button, if you hold it down, it does launch the camera. No, I do not want to save. And then these, as you see, work as the zoom, and then you've got the two exposures. You've got some basic manual control, and then video options. It does support 1080p, 30 FPS, and 60 FPS video recording. It doesn't support 4K video recording, even though the Snapdragon 650 chipset does supposedly support it. Presumably that's due to some heat limitations. For LTE performance, for cellular performance, it has Category 6 4G LTE. So that's a theoretical maximum download speed of 300 megabits per second, with an upload of, I believe, 50 megabits per second, which is pretty fast. Not that you'll probably ever see that from your carrier. Things like the Galaxy S8, claim to have much faster cellular, but unless you're in South Korea or very specific areas, anything above 100 megabits per second, which is Cat4, is probably enough. There's a 2,700 milliamp hour battery that is obviously non-removable. Now that might not sound like a lot, but because of the lower resolution screen and the power sipping Snapdragon 650 processor, that gives you a screen on time of around 10 hours or so, which I think is pretty good. That's the same sort of screen on time I have from my Ultrabook laptop. And the general day-to-day battery life, so if you're sort of medium to light use, you'll probably easily get through 2 days worth of battery. So if you just have a look around a bit, Sony do have a theme engine, so they've got some default themes that you can apply, and you can get some from their proprietary apps. So it does, you can have different icons and all sorts of interface changes. For example, there is a bit of bloatware on this device, I think. So if you see here, there is Facebook pre-installed. Facebook is a bit of a battery hog, so I wish that wasn't in there. You can disable it. AVG protection is on there. Amazon really shouldn't be there. The AVG one is potentially defensible because some regions require you to have an antivirus installed to be able to use certain banking apps and things like that. Other than that, you've got a bunch of Google apps that you would expect on a device like this. There's a TV side view, so if you have a Sony TV, you can actually use this phone as a remote to change channels and so on. The Xperia Lounge and Sketch like that. So there's a bunch of apps installed in S News and the weather and so there's a little bit of bloat, but if you really hate the bloat, you could unlock the bootloader and put your own Android on it and wouldn't have to deal with it, which again is an option. This is running 7.0, as I said before. This has got the latest security patch at the time of filming of May. Depending on your region, you tend to get security updates pretty quickly. You can also supposedly change your region you're in. So if we go into battery, you can see even just through this, it's easily a day, 1 day, 20 hours remaining, so easily a 2-day battery life. This is the battery care settings that allow you to extend your battery time, plus ultra stamina mode. There's a whole bunch of useful things about this phone that I really quite like it, not to mention a really nice design. And I think that's probably pretty much it. There's a SIM tray here, which it's a diagram on the back. So you need a nano SIM for this phone, and then you can use a micro SD. Again, this sticker on the back also tells you it's not micro B, it's Type C. Make sure you use proper Type C cables and adapters, and I think that's probably pretty much it. Thanks for watching the unboxing and the overview of the Sony Xperia X Compact Android smartphone.